The haunting silence of the Wyoming frontier was broken only by the sound of a shovel striking hard earth, as Brayden Ellis dug into the ground beneath the old cottonwood tree. The year was 1876, and the unforgiving landscape of the Wyoming Territory had just claimed another life, one that had meant everything to him. The small body of his 6-year-old son lay wrapped in a blanket beside the deepening hole. Little Jamie Ellis had succumbed to fever 3 days prior, despite Brayden's desperate 20-mile ride to fetch the doctor from Sweetwater Junction. The medicine had arrived too late, and now all that remained was this terrible duty no father should ever have to perform. Brayden's weathered hands gripped the shovel tighter as he remembered Jamie's laugh, the way the boy would race to meet him whenever he returned from working the cattle. The ranch had been their fresh start after his wife Sarah's passing during childbirth years before. It had been just the two of them, father and son against the world. The cottonwood tree had been Jamie's favorite spot on their modest ranch. He'd spend hours beneath its branches, playing with carved wooden horses Brayden had made him, telling stories to the rustling leaves as if the tree could hear. It seemed only fitting this would be his resting place. As the grave deepened, Brayden became aware of hoofbeats approaching. He didn't look up, not even when the rider dismounted and stood silently at the edge of the clearing. Only when the soft rustle of a dress came closer did he pause in his labor. "Mr. Ellis," came a gentle voice. "I heard about Jamie, I'm so sorry." Madeline Taylor stood a respectful distance away, her honey-brown hair pulled back in a simple bun, her dark blue dress stark against the golden prairie grass. She taught at the one-room schoolhouse 10 miles east, where Jamie had just begun attending this past spring. "Miss Taylor," Brayden acknowledged, his voice raw from disuse and grief, "you didn't need to come all this way." "I did," she said firmly, and he noticed she carried a small bundle of wildflowers and what appeared to be plant cuttings. "Jamie was special to all of us." Brayden nodded, unable to speak further, and returned to his grim task. Madeline waited quietly until he had finished the grave, deep enough to protect the boy from predators. When he finally climbed out, his hands were bleeding from blisters, but he hardly noticed the pain. With trembling hands, he lifted his son's body and placed him gently in the earth. He stood frozen then, unable to begin covering the grave. The finality of it threatened to crush his chest. Madeline stepped forward, took a handful of dirt, and let it fall softly into the grave. "The Lord giveth and the Lord taketh away," she whispered. Her simple act broke the spell. Brayden took up the shovel again and began the heartbreaking work of filling in the grave. Neither spoke as the pile of earth slowly diminished and a mound formed over Jamie's resting place. When it was done, Brayden drove a wooden cross into the ground, Jamie's name and dates carefully carved into it. He fell to his knees then, his composure finally breaking. Silent tears tracked down his dust-covered face. Madeline knelt beside him and began to plant the flowers she had brought: prairie primrose, wild columbine, and black-eyed Susans, along with a small sapling. "What are you doing?" Brayden asked, his voice barely audible. "Jamie loved flowers," she said simply. "He drew them in class and told me how much he wished they grew near your house. Now they will." She pointed to the sapling. "And this is a cottonwood cutting, so when this old tree passes, another will be here to watch over him." Something in her quiet determination reached through Brayden's grief. He watched her hands working the earth, creating life where he had just buried death, and for the first time in days he felt a flicker of something other than despair. "Thank you," he managed. Madeline nodded, continuing her work. "I'll bring water for them tomorrow," she said. "And the next day and the day after that, until they take root." As dusk began to settle over the prairie, Brayden walked Madeline to her horse. "It's a long ride back to town," he said. "You shouldn't be out alone after dark." "I'll be fine," she assured him, though they both knew the dangers of the frontier at night. "Stay," he found himself saying. "The ranch house has a spare room. You can head back at first light." Surprise registered on her face, but she nodded. "Thank you, Mr. Ellis." "Brayden," he corrected. "If you're going to be watering my son's flowers, you might as well use my given name." That night, as Madeline slept in the small room that had once been reserved for guests they'd never had, Brayden sat on his porch staring at the cottonwood tree silhouetted against the moonlit sky. The pain was still there, raw and overwhelming, but somehow the woman's presence had made it marginally more bearable. Tomorrow he would be alone again with his grief, but for now the house didn't feel quite as empty. True to her word, Madeline returned the next day with a water barrel in the back of a borrowed wagon. Brayden watched from the corral where he was mending a fence as she carefully watered each plant and checked their progress. "You don't have to do this," he said when he approached to help her unload the barrel. "I know," she replied, wiping a strand of hair from her forehead, "but I want to. Jamie was my student and I cared for him." There was something in her tone that told Brayden she understood loss in a way most people didn't. "You've lost someone too," he said, not a question but a recognition. Madeline paused, then nodded. "My brother. 2 years ago, cholera took him before he reached 20. I'm sorry." "As am I for your loss." She finished watering the plants and stood, brushing the dirt from her skirt. "The school term ends in 2 weeks. I'll be able to come more often then." Brayden wanted to tell her not to trouble herself, that he could water the plants, that her kindness, while appreciated, wasn't necessary. But the words died in his throat when he saw the determination in her eyes. "I'll look forward to it," he said instead. Over the next 2 weeks, Madeline came every other day. Sometimes she'd arrive after school hours, staying only long enough to tend the growing flowers. Other times, she'd come early in the morning before heading to the schoolhouse. Brayden began to anticipate these visits, finding reasons to be near the Cottonwood when she was expected to arrive. They rarely spoke beyond pleasantries, but there was comfort in her presence. She brought news from town. Sometimes a new family had arrived from back east. The general store had received a shipment of canned peaches. The stagecoach had been delayed by washouts along the trail. When the school term ended, true to her word, Madeline began coming more frequently. She expanded the flower bed around Jamie's grave, adding plants she claimed would attract butterflies and hummingbirds. "Jamie told me once that he wished he could see more birds," she explained as she worked. One evening in late June, Brayden invited her to stay for supper. He wasn't much of a cook, but he'd managed to shoot a rabbit that morning and the stew was passable. "This is good," Madeline said as they sat at his small table. "You're being kind," he replied with the ghost of a smile, "but thank you." "I'm not one for empty flattery, Mr. Ellis Brayden," she corrected herself. "My father always said honesty is cheaper than deception and lasts longer too. Your father sounds like a wise man." He was. He passed 5 years ago. Led a party of settlers through the mountains and caught pneumonia helping a family whose wagon had overturned in a river. "And your mother, still living back in Missouri, she writes regularly asking me to return east." "Why don't you?" Brayden asked, genuinely curious. Teaching in a frontier settlement was a hard life for a woman alone. Madeline was quiet for a moment. "I came west because I wanted to make a difference. Back home there were plenty of teachers. Here I'm needed," she paused. "And after Thomas, my brother, died, I needed a fresh start." Brayden nodded. He understood all too well the need to outrun grief, though he'd learned it was a race no one could win. After supper, they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the plains in gold and crimson. In the distance, a coyote called, its lonesome howl echoing across the empty spaces. "Will you stay here?" Madeline asked suddenly. "On the ranch, I mean." Brayden hadn't thought much beyond the next day since Jamie died. The future seemed too vast and empty to contemplate. "I suppose I will, it's all I have left." "It's a good piece of land," she observed. Jamie was proud of it. "He used to draw pictures of your cattle and the cottonwood tree." The mention of Jamie no longer brought the sharp stab of pain it once had. Instead, there was a bittersweet ache like pressing on a healing bruise. "He loved this place," Brayden agreed. "More than I did, I think. To me it was just land, a way to make a living, but Jamie saw magic in it." "Children often see what we miss," Madeline said softly. As darkness settled, Brayden lit a lamp, its warm glow a small defiance against the vast Wyoming night. He found himself reluctant to see her go. "It's getting late," he said finally. "The spare room is yours if you want it." Madeline hesitated. "People will talk." "Let them," he said with a shrug. "We both know the truth." She accepted his offer, and as he lay in his own bed that night, Brayden realized the house felt different with her there. Not whole, never that, but somehow less broken. July brought scorching heat that threatened the young flowers at Jamie's grave. Madeline now came daily. often with a book to read aloud as she sat in the shade of the cottonwood after tending to the plants. One particularly hot afternoon, Brayden returned from checking the herd to find her fast asleep against the trunk of the tree, a volume of Tennyson open on her lap. He stood watching her for a moment, the gentle rise and fall of her chest, the way the dappled sunlight played across her face. He recognized then what had been slowly growing within him over these past weeks. It wasn't love, not yet, but it was the possibility of it, the first tentative roots reaching toward something he'd thought forever lost to him. The realization terrified him. Loving meant risking loss, and he wasn't sure he could survive another wound like Jamie's death. Madeline stirred, opening her eyes to find him watching her. "I didn't mean to fall asleep," she said, somewhat embarrassed. "The heat does that," he replied, offering her his canteen. "You should head back before it gets worse." She took a drink and handed it back, their fingers brushing briefly. "Actually, I brought something to show you." She reached into the basket she'd brought and pulled out a leather-bound book. "It's Jamie's school journal. I should have given it to you sooner, but you knew it would hurt." Brayden finished for her. She nodded. "I thought you might be ready now." He took the journal, his calloused fingers tracing the childish writing on the cover. Jamie Ellis, age 6. Inside were drawings and simple sentences about life on the ranch, about his pa and their horse maple, about the cottonwood tree and the stars at night. Toward the end, he found a drawing of a woman with brown hair standing next to a boy and a taller man. Family was written beneath it in Jamie's uneven script. Brayden's vision blurred. "He drew you as family." Madeline's eyes were wet too. He was a special child. He saw connections where others didn't. The moment stretched between them, full of unspoken emotions. Brayden closed the journal carefully. "Thank you for this, for everything you've done." "I haven't done much," she demurred. "You've done more than you know," he said simply. That evening, when Madeline prepared to leave, Brayden found himself wishing again that she would stay. But he didn't ask, and she mounted her horse with a promise to return tomorrow. He watched her ride away, her figure growing smaller against the endless sky, and felt the familiar hollowness return to the house once she was gone. The next morning brought unexpected company. Frank Wheeler, a neighboring rancher, rode up with news that rustlers had been spotted in the area. "Took 3 head from the Jenkins place last night," he reported grimly. "Thought you should know, seeing as you're out here alone." Brayden thanked him for the warning. "I'll keep watch," he promised. "Saw the schoolmarm leaving yesterday," Wheeler remarked with a knowing look. "She's been coming around a lot, folks are saying." "She's tending the flowers at my son's grave," Brayden said flatly, his tone discouraging further comment. Wheeler had the grace to look abashed. "Meant no offense, Ellis, just making conversation." After Wheeler left, Brayden checked his rifle and pistol, making sure both were clean and loaded. Rustlers were a constant threat on the frontier, and now that he was alone, his ranch made an appealing target. When Madeline arrived later that afternoon, he warned her about the danger. "Perhaps you should stay away for a few days until this passes." "I'm not afraid," she insisted. "And the flowers need daily watering in this heat." Brayden knew better than to argue. Instead, he taught her how to use the signal bell he'd installed on the porch. 3 rings means trouble. "I'll hear it from anywhere on the property." She nodded, serious. 3 rings, I'll remember." That night, Brayden slept fitfully, waking at every sound. The coyotes seemed especially vocal, their yips and howls carrying across the plains like lost souls searching for home. He rose before dawn and made a circuit of his property, checking the cattle and looking for signs of intruders. Finding nothing amiss, he returned to the house as the sun crested the eastern hills, painting the land in shades of pink and gold. Madeline arrived earlier than usual, carrying not only water but also a basket covered with a checkered cloth. "I thought you might like some fresh bread," she explained. "I baked it this morning." The simple kindness touched him deeply. "You didn't have to do that." "I know," she said with a small smile. "But I wanted to." They shared the bread with honey and coffee on the porch, watching as the day warmed around them. It felt domestic in a way Brayden's life hadn't been since Sarah died, and the realization didn't sting as he might have expected. "What was she like?" Madeline asked suddenly. "Your wife?" Brayden was surprised by the question but found he wanted to answer. "Sarah was strong, determined. She came west with me when everyone told her it was foolish." Never complained even when we lost our first crop to drought and had to start over with cattle. He paused, remembering. She loved music, used to sing to Jamie before he was even born. She sounds wonderful, she was, Brayden agreed. She would have liked you. Madeline looked down at her hands. That's kind of you to say. It's the truth. Sarah appreciated honest people, people who weren't afraid of hard work or hard truths. They sat in companionable silence for a while longer before Madeline rose to tend to the flowers. Brayden watched her work, struck by how natural her presence felt on his land, by his son's grave in his life. Later that day, as thunderclouds gathered on the horizon, Madeline accepted his invitation to stay for supper without hesitation. The coming storm made travel dangerous, and they both knew it. They prepared the meal together, moving around the small kitchen with surprising ease. Brayden found himself laughing at a story she told about one of her more mischievous students, the sound strange to his own ears after so many weeks of silence. The storm broke just as they finished eating, rain lashing against the windows and thunder shaking the cabin. Lightning illuminated the room in brief, brilliant flashes. I love storms, Madeline confessed. The power of them, the way they clear the air. Jamie was afraid of them, Brayden said. He used to crawl into my bed during thunderstorms. I'd tell him stories until he fell asleep. What kinds of stories? Adventure tales mostly. Knights and dragons, explorers finding new lands. Sometimes stories about his mother so he'd know who she was. Lightning flashed again, followed immediately by a deafening crack of thunder. The lamp flickered but stayed lit. Tell me one, Madeline said softly. A story you would have told Jamie. So he did. As the storm raged outside, Brayden Ellis told a story about a brave knight who lost his way in a dark forest but found a magical tree that showed him the path home. The words came easier than he expected, memories of nights spent comforting his son, giving them life. When he finished, the storm had begun to subside, the thunder now a distant grumble rather than an immediate threat. You're a good storyteller, Madeline said. You should write them down for other children. Brayden shook his head. They were just for Jamie, but they could be for others too, a way for part of him to live on. The thought had never occurred to him, but it took root in his mind, a seed planted alongside the flowers at his son's grave. The next week passed in a similar pattern. Madeline came daily, sometimes staying for meals, sometimes reading or talking with Brayden as they tended the flourishing flower garden that now surrounded Jamie's grave. The cottonwood sapling she had planted was taking root as well, its small leaves trembling in the prairie wind. The threat of rustlers seemed to have passed, with no reports of further cattle thefts in the area. Life settled into a rhythm that, while still marked by grief, no longer felt like merely enduring each day. Then came the night that changed everything. Brayden was awakened by the distant sound of the signal bell. 3 rings, clear and urgent in the midnight stillness. He was on his feet instantly, grabbing his rifle and pulling on his boots. Outside, the moon was nearly full, casting enough light to see by as he ran toward the cottonwood tree. His heart hammered in his chest, fear for Madeline overshadowing all other thoughts. He found her backed against the tree trunk, facing 3 men whose horses were tethered nearby. The leader, a burly man with a scarred face, held a lantern in one hand and a pistol in the other. Well now, the man drawled when he spotted Brayden. Looks like the rancher finally showed up. Was beginning to think the lady was out here all alone. She's not alone, Brayden said, his rifle aimed steadily at the man's chest. And you're trespassing on private property. The second man, thin and nervous-looking, shifted his weight. We don't want trouble, mister. Just looking for a place to camp for the night. There's plenty of open land that isn't my ranch, Brayden replied coldly. I suggest you find it. The third man, who had remained silent until now, stepped forward. That's a mighty unfriendly attitude. Maybe we should teach you some manners. Maybe you should look around, came Madeline's voice, surprisingly steady. You're standing on a child's grave. The words gave the men pause. Even in the dim light, Brayden could see the leader's expression change as he noticed the small wooden cross and the flowers surrounding it. We didn't know, the leader said, lowering his lantern slightly. Now you do, Brayden said. Take your horses and go. For a tense moment, it could have gone either way. Then the leader holstered his pistol. Come on, boys, no point causing trouble here. The men mounted their horses and rode off into the night. Brayden kept his rifle ready until the sound of hoofbeats faded completely. Only then did he turn to Madeline, who was still standing against the tree. "Are you hurt?" he asked urgently. She shook her head. "No. They surprised me, that's all. I couldn't sleep and came out to, I don't know, sit with Jamie for a while." "You could have been killed," Brayden said, the fear he'd felt now turning to anger. "What were you thinking, coming out here alone at night?" "I was thinking I needed peace," she shot back. "I've come here at night before. It's never been a problem." "Before, how many times have you risked your life to sit by my son's grave in the middle of the night?" "I wasn't risking anything. This is the first trouble I've ever encountered." They stood glaring at each other, both breathing hard. Then Madeline's expression softened. "You were worried about me." "Of course I was worried," Brayden snapped, "when I heard that bell." He couldn't finish the sentence. The thought of finding her hurt or worse was unbearable. Without thinking, he pulled her into his arms, holding her tightly against his chest as if to reassure himself she was really there, really safe. Madeline stiffened in surprise, then relaxed into his embrace, her arms circling his waist. They stood that way for a long moment, the cottonwood leaves rustling softly above them, the moon casting their single shadow across Jamie's flower-covered grave. When they finally pulled apart, something had changed between them. Brayden reached up to brush a strand of hair from her face, his touch lingering on her cheek. "Madeline," he said softly, "I don't know what this is between us, but I know I don't want to lose you." She covered his hand with her own. "You won't lose me, Brayden, I'm here. I've been here all along." He leaned down, hesitant, giving her every chance to pull away. She didn't. Their lips met in a gentle kiss, tentative at first, then with growing certainty when they separated, Madeline rested her forehead against his chest. "I never expected this," she whispered. "When I came to plant flowers for Jamie, I only wanted to ease your pain, to honor a child I had come to care for." "And now?" Brayden asked. She looked up at him, her eyes reflecting the moonlight. "Now I care for his father too, more than I thought possible." They walked back to the house hand in hand, the night suddenly less threatening, less empty. For the first time since Jamie's death, Brayden felt something like hope stirring within him, fragile and new, but undeniably real. Madeline stayed that night, not in the spare room, but in Brayden's arms. They did nothing more than hold each other, finding comfort in closeness, in shared warmth against the chill of loneliness they had both known too well. In the morning, Brayden woke to find her watching him, a soft smile on her lips. "I should go back to town," she said. "I have lessons to prepare for the summer school." "Will you come back?" he asked, suddenly afraid that daylight would change what had happened between them. "Wild horses couldn't keep me away," she assured him, pressing a kiss to his forehead before rising to dress. As August ripened toward harvest time, Brayden and Madeline's relationship deepened. She still came daily to tend the flowers, but now she often stayed overnight, returning to town only when her duties required it. The townsfolk talked, of course. A single woman spending so much time at a widower's ranch was bound to cause gossip, but Madeline held her head high, meeting the whispers with dignity. "Let them talk," she told Brayden when he expressed concern. "We know the truth of what's between us." And what was between them was growing stronger each day. Brayden found himself sharing things he'd never told anyone, his fears when Jamie was born, the crushing guilt he felt when the boy took ill, the dreams he'd once had for their future together. Madeline listened, offering not empty consolation but understanding, and when needed, gentle challenges to his self-reproach. In turn, she spoke of her own losses, her hopes, her reasons for choosing the hard life of a frontier teacher rather than the comfort of her family home in Missouri. One evening, as they sat watching the sunset from the porch, Madeline asked, "Have you thought more about writing down those stories? The ones you told Jamie?" Brayden nodded. "I've started a few. It's harder than I expected, getting the words right on paper." "May I read them?" He hesitated, then went inside to retrieve a small stack of papers from his desk drawer. "They're not much," he warned as he handed them to her. Madeline read silently, her expression thoughtful. When she finished, she looked up with shining eyes. "These are wonderful, Brayden. Children would love them, and their parents too." Her approval meant more than he cared to admit. "There's a newspaper in Sweetwater Junction. The editor mentioned once he was looking for local stories to print. You should take these to him," she urged. "Let others enjoy them." The idea both terrified and appealed to him, sharing a piece of what he'd created for Jamie, letting his son's memory touch others. "Maybe I will," he said finally. As summer waned, the flowers at Jamie's grave reached their full glory, a riot of color against the golden prairie grass. The cottonwood sapling had taken firm root, its leaves beginning to turn yellow with the first hint of autumn. Brayden found himself visiting the grave not only with Madeline, but sometimes alone as well. He would talk to Jamie, telling him about the day's events, about Madeline, about the stories he was writing. It no longer felt like speaking to emptiness, but rather like maintaining a connection to the son he had loved so deeply. On the first anniversary of Jamie's death, Brayden and Madeline spent the entire day beneath the cottonwood tree. They brought a picnic, and Madeline had made a small cake, Jamie's favorite, she remembered from his stories at school. "He would be 7 today," Brayden said as they sat side by side, the picnic remnants packed away. "Yes," Madeline agreed, "growing tall like his father, I imagine." With his mother's eyes, Brayden added, Sarah's eyes were blue like the sky after rain. They sat in companionable silence as the day faded toward evening. The pain was still there, Brayden thought, but it had transformed somehow. It was now part of him rather than something that threatened to destroy him. As if reading his thoughts, Madeline took his hand. "Grief doesn't end," she said softly. "It just makes room for other things alongside it." Brayden squeezed her hand in silent agreement. Among the other things his grief had made room for was this remarkable woman who had planted flowers beside his tears, and in doing so, had helped him find a way to live again. That night, back at the ranch house, Brayden took something from his pocket and placed it on the table between them. It was a simple ring, a silver band with a small sapphire that had been his mother's. "I'm not asking yet," he said quickly when he saw Madeline's startled expression. "I know it's too soon, but I wanted you to know that someday when we're both ready, I hope to." Madeline's eyes filled with tears. "Why wait?" she asked simply. "Life is short and precious, Brayden. We both know that better than most. Are you saying?" "I'm saying yes," she replied. "Whenever you decide to ask, my answer will be yes." 2 weeks later, they were married in a small ceremony beneath the cottonwood tree. The schoolchildren came, along with a handful of neighbors and the preacher from town. Jamie's flower-covered grave was incorporated into the ceremony space, a reminder of the past that had brought them together and the love that would carry them forward. As winter settled over the Wyoming territory, Brayden and Madeline Ellis made the ranch house truly a home. The spare room became Madeline's study, where she prepared lessons and helped Brayden refine his stories, 3 of which had now been published in the Sweetwater Junction Gazette to considerable local acclaim. They talked often of the future of children they might have, of expanding the ranch, of the school Madeline hoped to build closer to the outlying homesteads, so children like Jamie wouldn't have to travel so far for education. The flowers by Jamie's grave went dormant beneath the snow, but Madeline assured Brayden they would return in spring, stronger for having endured the winter. The cottonwood sapling was carefully protected against the cold, its slender trunk wrapped in burlap. On Christmas Eve, as they sat before the fireplace in the home they now shared, Brayden gave Madeline a carved wooden box he had made himself. Inside was a journal bound in soft leather, similar to the one Jamie had kept at school. "For our story," he explained as she ran her fingers over the cover. "Whatever comes next," Madeline's eyes filled with tears. "It's perfect," she whispered, leaning over to kiss him softly, "and there's something I need to tell you, something to write on the first page." Her hand went to her still flat stomach, and Brayden's eyes widened in understanding. "Are you certain?" he asked, voice thick with emotion. She nodded, smiling through her tears. "The doctor confirmed it yesterday. By next summer there will be a child's laughter in this house again." Brayden pulled her into his arms, overwhelmed by the precious gift of this second chance at happiness. Outside, snow fell gently on the cottonwood tree and the flower-covered grave beneath it, a reminder of what had been lost and what had been found. The baby girl was born in late July, as the summer flowers reached their peak around Jamie's grave. They named her Sarah Joy for Brayden's first wife and for the unexpected happiness she brought to their lives. Madeline recovered quickly from the birth, and by August, she was once again tending the flowers at Jamie's grave, this time with infant Sarah cradled in one arm. Brayden would find them there in the afternoons, Madeline singing softly to the baby while keeping watch over the thriving garden she had planted. She should know her brother, Madeline explained when Brayden asked why she brought the baby to the grave so often. Even if she can never meet him in this life. As Sarah grew, she became a fixture beneath the cottonwood tree, first crawling among the carefully tended flowers, then toddling with uncertain steps across the grass that surrounded the grave. By the time she was 3, she spoke of brother Jamie as if he were simply away on a long journey rather than gone forever. Brayden's stories, originally written for Jamie, found a new audience in his daughter. Sarah would sit on his lap in the evenings, her brown curls tickling his chin as he read from the leather-bound collection that now contained dozens of tales. Many had been published in newspapers across Wyoming territory, and a printer in Cheyenne had approached him about creating a proper book. Madeline continued teaching, though now in a new schoolhouse built just 2 miles from their ranch. Brayden had donated the land and helped with the construction, ensuring that other children would have easier access to education than Jamie had. Their family grew again with the birth of a son they named Thomas, after Madeline's brother. He was a quiet child with watchful eyes and a smile that could light up the darkest days of winter. The cottonwood sapling planted beside Jamie's grave grew steadily taller, its roots intertwining with those of the older tree. The flowers Madeline had first planted had spread across the entire area, creating a living memorial that changed with the seasons but never faded away. 10 years after Jamie's death, as they sat beneath the cottonwood trees one young but strong Brayden took Madeline's hand in his. "Sometimes I still can't believe how much has changed," he said, watching as Sarah and Thomas played tag around the flower-covered glade. "How much you changed by planting those first flowers." Madeline leaned against his shoulder. "I didn't change anything. I just helped you remember how to grow things again, how to nurture life instead of only mourning death." "You did more than that," Brayden insisted. "You showed me that it was possible to honor Jamie's memory without being consumed by grief. That love doesn't end, it just transforms." She smiled up at him. "Like the cottonwood trees, the old giving way to the new, but both part of the same story." "Our story," Brayden agreed, pulling her close as they watched their children play in the dappled sunlight, the Wyoming wind rustling through the cottonwood leaves like a gentle benediction on all they had lost, and all they had found beneath its branches.